let me tell you the story of how I developed social anxiety disorder. I used to work night shifts, so I sleep during the daytime. A few years ago, I woke up to some pretty terrible news. I had a bunch of missed calls and unread text messages from my landlord. They were telling me to call them as soon as possible. I called them up and they told me there was a leak in the apartment downstairs, one they figured was coming from my apartment. As a result, they'd shut off the water while I was asleep. That meant no shower, no coffee, I couldn't even flush my own toilet. The only consolation was that I'd found a plumber to find and fix the leak, and he'd reimburse me the money if I kept a receipt or invoice. It was already around 3 in the afternoon when I learned the news about the water being shut off, which was obviously coming up to the end of most people's working days. I knew a few emergency plumbers who might be able to deal with the problem on short notice, but all of them were too busy to take the job. I ended up calling around to a few friends to see if I could stay at their place until the problem was dealt with. Luckily, one of my girlfriends was more than willing to take me in. She also offered me a Hail Mary sort of suggestion though, as to where I could find someone who wasn't a pro but knew just enough about plumbing to be able to help. Craigslist. I didn't think it would be very much help at all. I mean, I figured most people used it to sell stuff and organize hookups or whatever, but then again, I'd never actually used the site all that much. To my surprise, there was an entire section of the services part of the site that was called Household. What do you know? Third post down said something like 37-year-old handyman looking for some work, with the post saying he knew a little bit about everything and would take jobs on short notice at really low prices. It seemed a little bit too good to be true, and I suppose that's because it was. I gave the guy a call on the number he'd included in his post and explained the situation to him. Honestly, I expected him to give me the same "sorry, too busy" line that all the others had, but no. He seemed all too happy to drive out that evening to see if he could shut off this leaky pipe and go turn my water back on. I thought to myself, damn, all my prayers have just been answered. I mean, the guy even said himself it sounded like a really simple job. He was amazed another plumber hadn't come out already to just open up the floorboards, close off the pipe, and turn the water back on. Now, I knew absolutely nothing about all this, so when he said opening up the floorboards or whatever and how it was such a simple process, I just ate it all up. About an hour or so after I'd made the first phone call, the guy showed up to my apartment and told me he was outside. I realized I'd totally forgot to tell him which apartment it was. I let him know and I buzzed him in. The guy then showed up at my door, looking totally legit. I showed him into the bathroom, which is where the landlord thought the leak was coming from. I then went back to my TV room and carried on preparing my very late breakfast. Remember, I worked night shifts at the time. A few minutes later, the guy who called himself Tony called me into the bathroom. "Hey, does this look right to you?" I walked toward the bathroom, stuck my head around the door to take a peek, and that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I know, there's a bright light in front of me, and I groggily realized it was coming from the little pen flashlight of an EMT checking if I was responsive or not. I started panicking, asking what was going on. They told me to keep still while they got a stretcher up to my apartment. They put me on it and wheeled me out into the hallway outside. There was the friend who agreed to let me stay at her place. She was in hysterics, asking the EMT if I was going to be okay. I remember relaxing and sinking into the stretcher when I heard them say yes. I felt like I wanted to sleep for days, but when I told the EMTs I was feeling so tired I could just take a nap while they were driving me to the hospital, they kept insisting I stay awake. To do anything I could to stay up. In the end, they kept asking me all these dumb small talk style questions just to keep me talking. Then, at the hospital, I'm pretty sure they gave me something to keep me from drifting off as well. Because apparently, falling asleep with a head injury can actually be fatal. Not long after, the cops showed up to take a statement about the plumber guy from me. They'd gone through my place and found a bunch of valuables missing. Obvious stuff too, like the TV being gone from the mount on the wall. All my jewelry gone as well, with my rooms completely ransacked. Only then did I put two and two together and realized what really happened. That guy was not a plumber at all. He hadn't even touched anything in the bathroom. He just used the whole handyman thing as a front to rob people. One of the cops told me I was the fourth person to get robbed by that same guy that month, only because he uses different phone numbers every time and never told anyone the truth about himself. They hadn't been able to track him down. As far as I know, they still haven't caught the guy. He pulled a few robberies, then quit when the public got a warning about hiring anonymous handymen on the internet. He's probably still out there robbing people to this day, doing his thing, switching it up, and not getting caught. I hope those other people he robbed and beat got over what happened to them eventually, but I didn't. Like I said, I developed a serious anxiety disorder after the attack, and it hit me in a way I just didn't expect. Bad things can happen to good people sometimes. I know that, and I took a lot of comfort in knowing the cops were at least closing the net around this guy. Then though, after I got out of the hospital, it must have been 2 or 3 days before I realized I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. I got nervous just getting food from the delivery guys that dropped it off at my apartment building. I figured it would just go away eventually, only it never did. I always got this tight feeling in my chest, an itchy feeling all over me, whenever anyone I didn't know walked outside my apartment or outside in the hallway. Sometimes I still find myself running to the people with the gun I bought, staring through the little glass circle, waiting to see if the face of the guy who robbed me is on the other side. I know it's never going to be there, but I still find myself doing it. I got a nasty scar on my jawline from where the guy hit me too. The EMTs said I must have had a steel skeleton or something, because it's a miracle my jaw wasn't broken. I guess I got a lot of scars people can't see, along with a wound I'm not sure will ever properly heal. So way back when the PS3 first came out, I really wanted one. I mean, I wanted one bad. The main reason was because I wanted to play Call of Duty 3, still one of my favorite game series ever. Since my idiot self was slow on pre-ordering one though, I was slow when it came to the actual release date too. I remember watching eBay like a hawk, scouring Craigslist every day. Day after day went by, and I didn't have any luck finding one at all. Then though, boom, I see this one post on Craigslist that said a guy was selling his brand new PlayStation 3 and Call of Duty 3 included, both for like $400, at least $100 below asking price. The thing was, he needed to sell it ASAP, and he needed someone to drive over to him to pick it up. The person that could pay his asking price and pick up ASAP got the package. Somehow, I got lucky, really lucky. Apparently, a lot of folks were messaging him for it, and it sounded like they were going to rob him or something. I was older than most of those wannabe buyers. I could text him a picture of the cash and drive over to the Walmart parking lot that night to be able to pick it up. I felt like a kid at Christmas or something. Granted, most kids don't drive to Santa and pay him $400 to get their presents, but still, I was majorly excited. Only trouble was, the guy was working late that night. I'd have to drive over to the Walmart parking lot at like 2 in the morning just to pick it up. Now, I know what you're thinking. Walmart parking lot, 2 a.m., something bad was always going to happen. And yeah, I'd be lying if I said it hadn't passed my mind while I was thinking about this whole thing. I think I made myself clear at the beginning though. I really wanted that stupid World War II game, and the amount I wanted it outweighed whatever good sense I had. And that's how I found myself in the Walmart parking lot in South Hanover way after dark. Like I said, there was always a chance something bad was going to happen. I just figured it would be from the other end of the law. I'm just sitting there when I heard someone tapping on the glass of my driver's side window. I saw a gun and thought I was about to get carjacked or something. They got me out of the car at gunpoint. Then, though, I saw a badge on the dude's plainclothes belt. Honestly, I breathed a sigh of relief at first. I knew my reason for being there sounded sketchy. Picking up a PlayStation 3 at 2 in the morning would have sounded really sus if I was a cop. Then, though, they pulled the $400 in cash out of my wallet and said they were confiscating it as suspected earnings for drugs. I started to get real angry. I told them to search my car for drugs or guns or whatever they were looking for. If they didn't find anything, they had no right to take my money. One of the cops smirked when I said that, though, screaming in my face and threatening to beat me. His partner had to calm him down, like he was legitimately worried he was about to punch me or something. The angry cop walked back to their unmarked car, and the other cop wrote a ticket for the cash they took. While he did that, he apologized for his partner and promised if I brought some pay stubs to the precinct, I'd get all my money back, no problems. I was angry I was probably gonna miss out on the PlayStation, but I figured these guys were just doing their jobs. Getting it taken by the police was at least much better than getting straight up robbed and carjacked by some random dudes that wouldn't have been so reluctant to beat me down. I drove over to the precinct first thing in the morning with some pay stubs, which I figured would prove the money was mine. I get there, ticket in hand, and some cop walks out with an evidence bag with my money in it. Only right as she puts it down in front of me, I tell her there must be some kind of mistake. I told her the cops had pulled me out of my car and took exactly $400 off me, but in this bag there was no more than $100. She then shows me the ticket and the little box that listed confiscated items. It said $100 instead of $400. Right then, it was my turn to freak out. I couldn't believe they would do me like that. I started demanding complaint forms, numbers to call, all that. The lady just thought I was sizing up the amount, but I swear to God it was more money than that. She gave me the number to call to register a complaint, which I did. I know. Cops taking bribes around Baltimore is probably only raising eyebrows with the most naive of you. Missing out on the PS3 wasn't the scary thing, though. The scary thing was coming home from work 3 days later and seeing a car I didn't recognize parked right across the street from my house. I didn't immediately assume anything bad. I just wondered who in the neighborhood had gotten themselves such a nice new set of wheels. And that's when I saw him, though. The same plainclothes cop that wanted to tee off on me that night. The same cop who'd stolen my money. He just looked me dead in the eyes and smiled before driving off down the block. It was like a warning or something, just to tell me he knew I'd made the complaint. If criminals or gangsters do stuff that shakes you up, sure, but it makes sense. Those Johns are supposed to rob you or shoot you or whatever, but when it's the cops doing it, the same people who are supposed to protect you and you're supposed to turn to, that's really terrifying. Back when I was about 4 or 5 years old, me and my mom went to stay over with my grandparents for the weekend. My dad had left before I was even born, so it had always just been me and my mom. My grandparents were also a huge part of my life growing up. We'd go over on a Friday night, then stay till late on Sunday, mainly so my mom could have a social life or work the long weekend shifts at her job. So this one dark Sunday evening around the holidays, I remember getting carried out to the car. I was half asleep already. I don't even remember driving off because I must have been out like a light the moment I got strapped into the car seat. Next thing I remember though, I felt cold on my face. I could hear my mom crying and begging someone not to hurt her because she had me in the car. I remember looking outside and seeing what I thought was a monster at the time. But what I later learned was a man in a bunny mask. If you've ever seen that slasher movie You're Next, it was kind of like that. Not just some flimsy plastic thing. It was super detailed and really creepy looking. The guy's partner had basically stood in the middle of the road with his car at the side, like he crashed or something. When my mom pulled over to help, he put on a ski mask. His partner appeared with a bunny mask on, and then proceeded to rob us before doing something unspeakable to my mom. It almost killed her. I mean that both literally and metaphorically. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and I ended up living with my grandparents for almost a whole year because she was in and out of various institutions. It messed her up that bad. I hardly got away scot-free either. I had nightmares about a bunny monster chasing my mom for years afterward, and that image was burned into my retina. But like with most things, time is the greatest healer, and as I hit double-digit ages, things eventually got better, and we started to live something of a normal life again. Cut to me being 24, still living with my mom, looking for an apartment to move into because I got a decent paying job with my college degree. The place came unfurnished, so I was looking for cheap furniture and decor for the place. One of the first things I started looking at was Craigslist. In the for sale section, I started seeing some pretty sweet looking items at bargain bin prices, so I contacted one of the sellers and discovered it was some guy's granddaughter selling off a bunch of his stuff to pay for a care home. The girl seemed really nice and even promised me some kind of discount if I bought a bunch in bulk. We arranged for me to go over to her grandpa's place to check out some of the stuff before I handed over the cash. This one Saturday afternoon, I drove over to the house to start haggling. She introduced herself and was really sweet, but when I saw her grandpa, I realized why they needed the money for a care home. He was in a really bad way. I don't know exactly what was wrong with him because I didn't ask much questions about his condition, but you could see it was real bad. He couldn't move at all from his wheelchair. He had an oxygen tank and barely even reacted to meeting me. You could just kind of visibly see he didn't have too long left. I checked out the 3 main items on my list: a closet, a desk, and a dinner table. Me and the granddaughter agreed on a price for them. I obviously had to arrange a U-Haul to go pick them up and all that stuff, but I figured I could arrange for the following weekend, once we'd confirmed the purchases. Once that was done, me and the granddaughter had some coffee together, and she explained that almost everything in the house was for sale. Apparently, her grandpa had been something of a wild child in his youth, in and out of jail. Although he'd led a much more regular existence after his final stint in jail, he hadn't got a lot saved up for a rainy day. It was a real sad story. The girl went on to explain that everything in the garage was for sale too, if I wanted to take a look around in there. At this stage, I figured I'd buy a few more things from them. Maybe stuff they wouldn't be able to sell easily, knickknacks or whatever. I could decorate my apartment while the money went to what I considered at the time to be a worthy cause. We finished up the coffee and the girl went to help her grandpa out with something. I headed out to the garage to check out all the stuff they had piled in there. And boy do I mean piled up. There was a literal mountain of garbage in there, but some stuff I figured I could make a home for. I'm talking stuff like old cookie jars, books, weird ornaments, all kinds of things. I started digging through this pile of stuff, placing some of the items I considered buying to one side, when suddenly I spotted something that made me freeze in place. What had obviously once been bright white was now dirty gray-brown. All the paint in the eyes and the mouth was old and peeling, but surely I recognized what this was. It was something I'd seen in hundreds of nightmares I had as a kid, something that traumatized me and my mom for years. It was a bunny mask, of the exact same design as the one worn by the guy who'd almost taken my mom from me. I remember looking at it for a few seconds, then kind of stumbling away in complete disbelief. I told myself there was no way it was the exact one. But then I started to piece it together, how Grandpa had been in and out of prison, and it started to make a horrible kind of sense. I tried to pull myself together. I think I did a good enough job of it to just bundle up what I'd pulled out of the trash pile before carrying it into the house to talk. I put on a fake smile and paid for the stuff, then tried to make it sound as natural and innocently curious as possible. When I asked the girl what her grandpa had gone to jail for, she was kind of taken aback and didn't know exactly. She just knew we didn't talk much about it, and neither did her mom. So she figured that whatever it was, it must have been something to be pretty ashamed of. I asked if I could go into the room with the guy to thank him personally, insisting when the girl said he might not really be able to hear me, and if he did, he probably wouldn't respond in any way. I said it was okay, still maintaining my composure, and insisting I go into this room to thank him. By the time I got to the guy's bedroom door, my hand was shaking though. When I walked in, there he was, sitting in his wheelchair, not even looking to see who just walked in. His granddaughter had positioned him in front of a TV, but he wasn't really watching it. He was just kind of staring into space. I sat down on the bed near him, arranging my thoughts at first. I asked him something like, "Where were you living around December of 1987? It obviously didn't get so much as a nod from him. He just kept his empty stare fixed on the wall. I wanted to get up and leave, wondering if my questions would just confuse or upset a sick old man, but there was a part of me that wouldn't let me leave without asking him the other questions. I was hoping he'd say something, anything to me about that mask I'd found in the garage. As it turns out though, I didn't need his words to know he could hear me. I asked him again, "Did you rob a woman with a kid in her car around Christmas time of that year?" Nothing moved but his eyes, which moved up from the spot he was looking at as he began to stare at something else. This time though, he clearly was not staring into oblivion. It looked like he was remembering something. I told him his granddaughter had told me he'd been in and out of jail, and although he hadn't told her exactly what for, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what it was. He stayed quiet, but his body began to tremble, almost like he was trying to say something but couldn't. What I said next was basically a lie. I whispered in his ear, "I know it was you." His reaction confirmed it in my head. He had no way of effectively communicating, but I could see his eyes were filled with regret. They started to tear up. Maybe not being able to talk was beginning to overwhelm him. At least I figured that was what his reaction was. I don't know if he wanted me to tell him to go kick rocks or if he wanted to say he was sorry or what, but I didn't care at that point. I just had one more thing to say to him before I got up and walked out. "You almost ruined my life. You deserve to be in that chair." He actually let out a kind of whimper as I stood up and walked out. When the guy's granddaughter stopped me to say thank you, I disguised what I was feeling by telling her myself and her grandpa had shared quite an emotional exchange of gratitude. I guess she thought it was kind of sweet. I honestly hope she never found out the truth. After getting back into my car, I only made it about 2 blocks before I pulled over and started bawling. I was filled with doubt, like the thing that got me crying was the idea I might have seriously distressed a sick old man. But the other voice in my head was saying, "That's him. I know it was him." When I regained my composure, I drove over to my mom's place to tell her all about it, and we both cried together. When she said she also thought it was the same guy, I asked her if anyone was caught for what happened to us. She said yes, but they were sent to jail as a result, and she had to appear in court to testify. That's part of the whole reason I was staying with my grandparents during that period. The whole court appearance thing just weighed so heavily on her mental health. I actually had no idea anyone was caught for it up until that moment. I was always under the impression those guys had just gotten away, and I grew up knowing better than to bring it up with my mom either. I mean, I still wouldn't have ever really spoken to her about it if it wasn't for that chance encounter. Part of me wondered if she'd even really believe me. It was only when I described what the guy looked like that it actually clicked for her. At first, she refused to believe it. It just seemed like perfect karma for the guy, like too perfect an end to a story. I don't believe things like that happen very often in life. In the months that followed, it felt like a great weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Nothing could ever change the past or undo the trauma we both experienced, but knowing the guy was suffering in such a way was like proof there really was a God. I know that might sound a little bit unhinged, but I can't really think of any other way to phrase it. I guess I still don't quite believe in happy endings, and I still think the world is a cold, cruel place, but I know from experience there's such a thing as divine justice. Before I really get into this, I want all of you who are about to hear my story to know that I am a decent man. I care for and about other people, but we all get down on our luck sometimes. When this took place, I was a single father, on the verge of losing my home. My wife had died recently to cancer, and my 2 children really needed me to be that strong, stable parent They knew would never leave and always take care of them. When my wife passed, I dove headfirst into a horrible depressive episode. I stopped eating and I couldn't bring myself to go into work. This, of course, resulted in me being fired, and at one point or another, Child Protective Services was called. The threat of having my children taken away from me was very serious and absolutely terrifying. I knew my wife would have been disappointed in me if she could see me now, and frankly, I was disappointed in myself as well. After losing my job, all the money I'd saved began to drain very quickly. By my 4th month of unemployment, I found myself shoplifting bread and lunch meat from the store just so I could feed my children and make ends meet. I'd stopped making payments on the house, and the bank told me they were going to foreclose if I didn't pay everything within a month. I tried to get my job back, but they pretty much wanted nothing to do with me. Finding a job was hard in those days too. It was around 2009 and I looked everywhere. On top of possibly losing my home, I had CPS telling me that without my job and certainly without my home, my children would be taken away immediately. Placed with people who could house and care for them properly, seeing as I would be considered an unfit parent. I was not about to let anyone take my children away from me, so I did what any desperate man would do to keep his children. I robbed a couple of bars. I know that sounds insane, but at the time, I had nothing left to lose. With the threat of losing everything looming over me at all times, I had to do something. I made a plan to go to this upscale bar, only a couple of cities away, and get whatever small amount of money I could. I knew there would be threats involved coming from my end, but I was never going to hurt anyone for real. Eventually, the day finally came. It was the middle of summer around noontime, a time when I figured not too many people would be there. I had a knife on me and brought a duffel bag to put in whatever small amount of money I managed to get. I parked my minivan directly outside the double doors of the small building and entered quickly. I brandished my knife and screamed at everyone to get down and stay calm. The screams were immediate. I could see the terror on these people's faces. The worst part, though, was that I hadn't realized this wasn't just a bar. It was a restaurant, too. My original plan had suddenly turned into traumatizing multiple children I had no idea would even be there. In my haste, I had overlooked a portion of researching that should have gone into planning out such a robbery. The place had bar in the name, though, so I figured it was that and called it. In the moment, though, I couldn't let these small details bother me. I'd come in with a purpose, and it wasn't like I could just back out now. I instructed everyone to take out their wallets and put whatever cash they had on the tables closest to them, as well as any watches or jewelry of substantial value. I rushed to the register and threatened the worker to open it, or I would hurt someone in the room. She did what she was told, and I pulled out whatever money was within. I collected all the loose money and valuable from the tables and quickly exited the bar without a single person trying to stop me. The only issue was, after counting up the money and pawning off the jewelry, I'd only made out with around $3,000, and that wasn't going to be nearly enough. Eventually, I saw it on the news. The story broke about a robber, but no one ever came to my door and arrested me. I figured over time, maybe I was in the clear. I knew I would have to do it again, too. This time, I did much more research in the bar I'd be hitting. Made sure there would be no children and not as many people either. The bar was about an hour away, and not quite such an upscale place. I parked my car with my supplies and headed out while the kids would be at school and people would be at work. It was around 1 in the afternoon or so. When I entered the bar in a ski mask but knife in hand, I honestly thought this would go just as smooth as the last time. Of course, nothing ever does. The first thing I noticed was the rough crowd in the place. Large men who looked like bikers, and people who had clearly been through a lot in their lives. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't scared. I knew there was no backing out now, though. I went up to the register, and the worker didn't hesitate to give me the money inside. That's when I felt it. A sharp pain began to burn with each small step backwards I took. I looked down and saw multiple stab wounds and a knife sticking out of my stomach, with a man grinning next to me, still holding the handle of the blade. He was clearly proud of himself for what he had just done. Instinct told me to pull it out, and when I did, the blood started gushing. I knew if I didn't get out of there, these people would kill me. I quickly began making my way to the front door, but I was being pushed and attacked all along the way. I remember swinging my knife at these people, but I didn't think I actually made contact with anyone. I was able to make it out and into my van, with the stab wounds being my only injury. I knew I couldn't go to the hospital though, otherwise the police would know I was the one robbing these bars. I pulled up to a drugstore and grabbed some bandages and rubbing alcohol to clean and hopefully seal the wounds to stop them from bleeding. The pain was incredible, and I thought I was going to pass out a few times, but I managed to push through it. For the next month, I couldn't even walk without any pain, but I was able to keep my children and find a job soon after. I'm grateful the wounds didn't turn into something more serious. I did end up finding I'd accidentally stabbed someone in the bar during the scramble to get out of there. It was a superficial wound though, so thankfully he recovered just fine. I felt horrible about it at the time, and I still do to this day. My kids are grown now with their own families, and I don't recommend anyone go down the route I did, but it felt like my only option at the time. I know this whole story makes me seem like a terrible person, but ask yourself, what would you do to keep your children? Desperation makes you do crazy things, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.